The bell above the glass door rang softly as the young man stepped inside the piano showroom. The space was wide and quiet, filled with polished wooden floors and rows of grand pianos that reflected the soft ceiling lights. The air smelled faintly of old wood and fresh polish. Everything in the room looked expensive, calm, and carefully arranged, as if nothing unexpected was supposed to happen here. The young man paused near the entrance. He wasn't sure if he should go further in. His clothes were clean but simple, and his shoes showed signs of long use. People like him didn't usually walk into places like this. Most visitors here arrived confidently, already knowing which piano they wanted and how much they were ready to spend. He took a few slow steps forward, his eyes moving from one piano to another. Each instrument looked like a piece of art. Some had price tags that could buy a house. He didn't react to the numbers. What caught his attention was the sound that lived inside them, waiting quietly. Near the center of the room stood a large black grand piano. Its surface shined like a mirror. The lid was slightly open, as if inviting someone to sit down. The young man felt drawn to it. He didn't rush. He walked slowly, almost carefully, as if afraid to disturb the peace of the room. A few customers were already inside. They were well-dressed, speaking softly, discussing brands and models. Some glanced at the young man briefly, then looked away, assuming he was lost or just passing time. Behind a long counter stood the owner of the showroom. He had seen many people come and go. He could often tell within seconds who was serious and who was not. When he noticed the young man standing near the grand piano, his expression tightened slightly. He watched as the young man reached out and gently placed his fingers on the edge of the keys. The touch was light, respectful. He didn't press anything yet. He simply rested his hand there, feeling the cool surface. "That piano is very expensive," the owner said from across the room. His voice was calm but carried a clear warning. The young man quickly pulled his hand back and nodded. "I understand," he replied quietly. The owner stepped closer, looking him up and down. He wasn't angry, just curious and a little amused. "Are you looking to buy?" he asked. The young man hesitated. "No," he said honestly. "I just wanted to see it." A soft chuckle came from one of the customers nearby. Another shook his head slightly, as if this was a familiar scene. People often came in just to look, dreaming without the means. The owner folded his arms. "See it, yes. Play it, no," he said. The young man nodded again. "I won't touch it," he said, but his eyes lingered on the keys, not with greed, but with longing. Something about that look made the owner pause. It wasn't the look of someone who wanted to show off. It was quiet, almost careful, like someone greeting an old friend. "You play?" the owner asked suddenly. The young man looked up, surprised by the question. "A little," he said. This time the laughter was clearer. A man near the window smiled openly. "Everyone plays a little," he said. The owner smiled too, though his eyes stayed sharp. "This piano costs $150,000, he said. "It's not for a little." The young man swallowed. "I know," he replied. There was a brief silence. Then, almost without thinking, the owner said something that changed the air in the room. "Tell you what," he said, raising his voice slightly so others could hear. "Play it. If you can play without mistakes, I'll give you the piano." The room went still for a moment. Then someone laughed. Another raised an eyebrow. A woman covered her mouth, unsure if this was a joke. The owner added, half smiling, $150,000. Free. The laughter grew louder now. It sounded harmless, playful, but it carried disbelief. No one thought this was a serious offer. Felt like a challenge made for entertainment, not a real promise. The young man stood frozen. He hadn't expected this. His heart began to beat faster, not from excitement, but from pressure. Every eye in the room was on him now. "I didn't mean," he began. The owner interrupted him. "Unless you're afraid," he said lightly. The young man looked down at the floor. He wasn't afraid of the piano. He was afraid of the moment, of being seen, of being judged. One of the customers leaned toward another and whispered, This should be interesting. The owner stepped aside, giving a clear path to the piano bench. Go on, he said. One piece. No mistakes. The young man closed his eyes for a brief second. Memories passed through him. Late nights, silent rooms, worn keys, and hours of practice that no one ever watched. Music had always been private for him. This was different. He opened his eyes and took a step forward. As he sat down on the bench, the room grew quiet again. Phones were lifted, ready to record what they expected would be an awkward moment. The owner leaned against the piano, confident, amused. The young man placed his hands above the keys, hovering. He didn't rush. He took a slow breath, letting the noise in his head fade. No one noticed how steady his posture was, how natural his hands looked above the keyboard. No one noticed the calm settling over his face. At that moment, they still believed this was a joke. They had no idea that the first note was about to change everything. The young man sat still on the piano bench, his hands resting quietly in his lap. The room around him felt larger now, heavier. He could feel eyes on his back, on his hands, on his face. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was full of expectation, doubt, and quiet judgment. No one in the showroom knew where he came from or what his life looked like outside those glass walls. To them, he was just another stranger who wandered in without a plan. They didn't know that music had followed him for as long as he could remember. He grew up in small rooms where sound traveled easily through thin walls. There was never space for loud dreams. From an early age, he learned to keep things inside. Music became one of those things. He listened more than he spoke. When others talked about sports or money, he paid attention to rhythm and silence. His first piano was not a piano at all. It was an old keyboard with several broken keys, placed on a shaky table. Some notes didn't work unless pressed hard. Others were too loud. But he learned to adjust. He learned to listen closely. When something went wrong, he didn't complain. He adapted. There were no teachers standing beside him. No applause at the end of practice. He learned by watching, by listening, and by repeating the same piece until his fingers moved without thinking. Many nights, he played softly so no one would ask questions or tell him to stop. Music was never about showing skill for him. It was about control, about discipline, about getting one small thing right in a world that often felt messy. As the years passed, life demanded other things. Work came first. Bills mattered more than melodies. Still, the piano never left his mind. Even when he was tired, even when his hands ached from long days, he found time to play. Sometimes only for a few minutes. Sometimes in complete darkness. Back in the showroom, someone cleared their throat. The sound pulled him back to the present. You ready? The owner asked, his tone casual, almost playful. The young man nodded slowly. He didn't look at the audience. He looked at the keys. To everyone watching, he still seemed out of place. His calm didn't look like confidence. It looked like uncertainty. A few people shifted their weight, already losing interest. They expected a short performance, maybe a wrong note, and then an awkward exit. One customer whispered, "He should have walked away." Another replied, "At least he's brave." The young man heard none of it. His mind moved somewhere quieter, somewhere familiar. The noise of the room faded, replaced by memory. He remembered the first time he truly understood mistakes. Not just wrong notes, but small slips in timing, uneven pressure, rushed pauses. He learned that perfection wasn't about playing fast or loud. It was about patience, about respect for the piece. He had failed countless times before, not in front of crowds, but alone. And each failure taught him something. Each correction stayed with him. He lifted his hands and placed them gently on the keys. The piano felt different from what he was used to. The keys were smoother. The response was instant. Every touch mattered. There was no hiding here. This instrument would reflect exactly what he gave it. The owner leaned forward slightly, curious despite himself. The young man took one more breath. Before he played, he paused. It wasn't hesitation. It was respect. He adjusted his seat, straightened his back, and let his fingers rest naturally. Someone in the back checked their phone. Another crossed their arms. Time felt slow. Then, finally, the first note sounded. It was soft, almost gentle, not dramatic, not loud, just clear. A few heads lifted. The second note followed, then the third. The sound moved smoothly, like a quiet conversation. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't unsure. Carried intention. The owner's smile began to fade. People expected mistakes early. A missed key. A stumble. None came. The young man's hands moved with control, not speed. His fingers curved naturally, pressing each key with exact pressure. The melody grew, slowly filling the room without overpowering it. A woman near the window stopped recording and simply listened. The piano responded beautifully, and he adjusted with it, guiding the sound instead of forcing it. This was not someone guessing. This was someone who understood the instrument. The whispers stopped. Each note landed where it should. Each pause felt intentional. The music didn't beg for attention. It earned it. The owner straightened his posture, eyes fixed on the keyboard. He had heard many performances in this room. This one felt different. The young man remained calm, his face unreadable. Inside, he felt the familiar focus settle in. This was the place he knew best. Not the room, but the state of mind. As the piece continued, people began to shift closer without realizing it. The distance between them and the piano closed. No one laughed now. The music carried a quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't need permission. It spoke of long hours, of mistakes corrected in silence, of discipline built without praise. The owner glanced at the price tag on the piano, then back at the hands moving across the keys. A strange feeling settled in his chest. This was not entertainment anymore. This was something else. The young man played on, unaware of the change in the room. He wasn't thinking about the piano's value. He wasn't thinking about the challenge. He was simply playing. And with every passing second, it became clearer to everyone listening that they were witnessing something they did not expect. Something real. Something rare. The music continued, steady and clear, filling the showroom in a way no one expected. What began as curiosity slowly turned into focus. People who had been standing casually now leaned forward. Even those who had planned to leave stayed where they were, drawn in by something they couldn't easily explain. The young man's hands moved with purpose. Not fast, not slow, but exactly as needed. Every note followed the last like it belonged there. There were no sharp mistakes, no rushed moments. The melody flowed as if it had been waiting years to be heard on this piano. The owner stopped shifting his weight and stood completely still. His arms dropped to his sides. He had made the challenge lightly without thinking much of it. Now, with every passing second, the weight of his words began to settle on him. A man near the back quietly lowered his phone. Recording no longer felt right. This wasn't something to capture for laughs. The young man's face remained calm. His eyes followed the keys, but his mind was somewhere deeper. Each sound guided his next movement. He didn't think ahead. He stayed in the moment, trusting the hours of practice that lived in his hands. The piano responded perfectly. It revealed everything: strength, balance, and control. It also revealed truth. There was no pretending here. Anyone who knew music could hear it. This was not luck. This was skill built over time. The melody grew slightly stronger, then softened again. The changes were subtle but intentional. The room breathed with the music. A woman seated near the front felt her chest tighten. She didn't know why. The notes reminded her of something she couldn't name. That was the power of it. The music didn't show off. Spoke quietly, honestly. The owner's eyes moved from the hands to the young man's posture. Everything about him showed control. There was no stiffness, no struggle. Only calm focus. Someone whispered, "He's not missing a single note." Another replied under their breath, "This isn't beginner playing." The young man heard nothing. He was far from the room now. He remembered cold nights when the heater didn't work and he practiced with numb fingers. He remembered fixing broken keys with tape. He remembered stopping in the middle of pieces to correct the smallest errors. Those moments shaped him more than applause ever could. As the piece moved forward, the difficulty increased. Tricky transitions appeared. Unexpected changes in rhythm demanded precision. This was where most players slipped. He didn't. His fingers adjusted naturally, as if guided by instinct. The sound stayed clean. The timing stayed exact. The owner felt a quiet discomfort rise in him. Not anger, not fear, something closer to realization. He had judged too quickly. He had assumed too much. A few customers exchanged looks. Some smiled softly. Others looked stunned. The young man reached a section that required full control. The room seemed to hold its breath. Even the air felt still. Then he played through it flawlessly. A faint sound escaped someone's lips, almost like a gasp. The music continued, building toward its ending. The notes carried emotion now, not loud or dramatic, but deep. It felt personal, as if the piano was telling a story that didn't belong to anyone else. The owner's confidence was gone. He stood there listening, his earlier smile a distant memory. The price of the piano no longer felt like a joke. Felt real. The young man's shoulders stayed relaxed. He didn't rush the ending. He allowed each note to finish fully before moving on. Silence became part of the music. The final section approached. No one moved. He played the last sequence with the same care as the first. When the final note faded, he didn't lift his hands right away. He let the sound disappear naturally, honoring the moment. For a second, there was no reaction. Then someone began to clap. Slowly, others joined in. The applause grew, not loud at first, but sincere. It wasn't excitement. It was respect. The young man lowered his hands and sat quietly. He looked slightly uncomfortable, as if unsure what to do next. The owner cleared his throat. He stepped forward, stopping just beside the piano. He looked at the young man, then at the people watching. "You didn't miss," someone said quietly. The owner nodded once. He had no words ready. He had never expected to stand in this position. The young man finally looked up. His eyes met the owner's for the first time since the performance began. There was no pride in his expression, only calm. "I'm done," the young man said softly, beginning to stand. The owner raised his hand slightly. "Wait," he said. The room grew quiet again. The owner looked at the piano, then back at the young man. He took a slow breath. "You played without mistakes," he said. The words hung in the air. Some people smiled. Others waited. The young man didn't respond right away. He simply nodded. The owner felt the weight of every eye on him now. The challenge he had made so easily had become a promise heard by many. He knew the next moment would decide more than money. It would decide who he was. The young man stepped back from the bench, giving space, not demanding anything. That gesture said more than words. The owner straightened his jacket. His voice was steady, but his thoughts were not. "We need to talk," he said. The applause faded. The room waited. The young man stood quietly, hands at his sides, patient. The piano sat between them, silent now, but full of what had just happened. And everyone in the showroom understood one thing clearly. This moment was not over. It was only beginning. The room stayed quiet after the owner spoke. No one rushed to say anything. It felt like everyone understood that something important was unfolding, something that could not be taken back or laughed off anymore. The owner stepped away from the piano and walked a few slow steps, as if he needed space to think. He looked around the showroom at the instruments, the people, the polished floors that had always felt familiar and safe. Now they felt different. The young man remained where he was, standing calmly beside the bench. He didn't cross his arms or shift nervously. He didn't look proud. He didn't look scared. He simply waited. "I didn't expect that," the owner finally said. His voice was quieter than before, no longer playful. "Not at all." A customer near the window nodded. "None of us did." The owner looked at the young man again. "Where did you learn to play like that?" he asked. The young man shrugged slightly. "Wherever I could," he said. "Whenever I could." There was honesty in his words, but no attempt to impress. He wasn't trying to build a story around himself. The owner exhaled slowly. "You know what I said," he continued. "Everyone here heard it." The young man nodded. "Yes, But you also know what that piano is worth, the owner said. This isn't a small thing. I understand, the young man replied. His voice stayed respectful. If you didn't mean it, that's okay. That sentence landed heavier than any demand could have. A few people exchanged looks. The owner felt it too. He had expected excitement, maybe confidence, maybe even pressure. He had not expected understanding. The owner rubbed his hands together and looked down at the floor. For years, he had built his reputation on trust. People came to his showroom because his word meant something. And yet, just minutes ago, he had used that word lightly. The young man stepped back another small step, creating distance between himself and the piano. It was a quiet gesture, but it spoke clearly. He wasn't here to take something that didn't belong to him. I didn't come here for a challenge, he said gently. I just wanted to play. The room felt warmer somehow. The owner looked up sharply. Why? He asked. The young man thought for a moment. Because I don't always get the chance, he said. And this piano, it deserved to be played. Silence followed. The owner walked back to the piano and ran his fingers lightly along the edge, not pressing any keys. He had sold hundreds of instruments, but he had never thought about them the way the young man just had. One of the staff members cleared his throat. He didn't miss a note, he said. I've been listening all these years. That was clean. Another staff member nodded. Very clean. The owner closed his eyes briefly. He remembered the laughter earlier, the way he had smiled, the way he had assumed. He opened his eyes and looked at the young man again. Do you know how many people try to play that piano? He asked. The young man shook his head. Many, the owner said. Most of them have money. Some of them have lessons. Very few of them have what you just showed us. The young man said nothing. The owner took a breath and turned toward the people watching. I made a promise, he said. And promises matter. A low murmur spread through the room. The owner raised his hand slightly. But I need to be honest, he continued. I never thought I'd have to keep it. No one interrupted. The young man watched quietly, his expression unchanged. He wasn't waiting for a reward. He was waiting for a decision. The owner stepped closer to him. If I give you that piano, he said, it will change things for both of us. I know, the young man replied. Are you ready for that? The young man paused. Then he nodded. I've been ready for a long time, he said. I just didn't know when. Those words stayed in the air. The owner looked at the piano again, then at the price tag. Suddenly felt meaningless. Money could explain value, but it couldn't explain moments like this. He turned back to the young man. You played without mistakes, he said clearly. And you played with respect. The owner straightened his shoulders. The piano is yours. For a second, no one reacted. The words took time to sink in. Then the room erupted in applause, louder than before. Some people smiled widely. Others looked stunned. A few even wiped their eyes, surprised by their own emotions. The young man stood frozen. Are you serious? Someone whispered. The owner nodded firmly. I am. The young man finally spoke, his voice low. Thank you, he said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The owner extended his hand. The young man shook it, his grip steady. I want you to know something, the owner said. You didn't win this piano because of the challenge. The young man listened. You earned it because you reminded us why music matters. The applause softened into quiet respect. The young man looked at the piano once more, this time with a different expression. Not excitement, gratitude. People began to talk among themselves. Some asked questions. Others simply watched. The young man stepped back toward the bench, not to play again, but to close the lid gently. The sound echoed softly through the room. That simple action said everything about who he was. The owner noticed. This isn't the end, he said quietly. The young man looked up. It's the beginning, the owner added. Outside, the street moved on like any other day. Cars passed. People walked by, unaware of what had just happened inside the showroom. But for those who were there, the room would never feel the same again. They had witnessed something rare. Not just talent, but character. After the applause slowly faded, the room didn't return to normal. People stayed longer than they planned. Conversations felt softer, more thoughtful. The piano sat quietly now, but it felt different, as if it carried a new meaning. The young man stood near the window, letting the moment settle. He didn't rush to touch the piano again. He didn't take pictures or call anyone. He simply watched the street outside, grounding himself. The owner spoke with a few customers, answering questions he had never been asked before. Not about prices or delivery times, but about music, about practice, about what real talent looks like. One person approached the young man carefully. "That was incredible," they said. "How long have you been playing?" He smiled politely. "Long enough," he replied. Another asked where he studied. He shook his head. "I learned wherever I could," he said again, using the same simple words. He didn't explain further. The staff brought paperwork, but the owner waved it away. "Later," he said. "Let him breathe." The young man appreciated that more than anyone knew. He walked back to the piano and sat for a moment, not to play, but to feel the bench beneath him. He placed his hands on the closed lid, steady and calm. The piano was real. The moment was real. Still, it felt unreal. He thought about the nights he doubted himself. The times he wondered if all the quiet effort meant anything. He remembered being told, without words, that music like his belonged in the background. Now the background had moved forward. The owner joined him. "You don't owe anyone anything," he said quietly. "If you want to leave, you can." The young man shook his head. "I'll stay a little," he said. They sat in silence for a few seconds. "I need to ask," the owner said. "Why didn't you stop me earlier, when I made the challenge?" The young man thought. "Because sometimes people need to hear the answer," he said. "Not just the words." The owner nodded slowly. Word began to spread quietly at first. A few people outside had noticed the crowd through the glass. Someone mentioned what happened. Phones came out again, but this time not for jokes. This time for sharing. The young man didn't look for attention. Still, it found him. Later that day, someone asked if he would perform again, maybe at an event. Another mentioned connections, opportunities, stages. He listened politely, then said, "I need time." Time had always been his teacher. He trusted it. The owner finally brought the paperwork. He explained each page carefully, making sure the young man understood everything. There was no rush, no pressure. When it was done, the owner slid the papers aside. "This piano belongs to you," he said again, as if repeating it would make it easier to believe. The young man nodded. "I'll take care of it," he said. "I know you will." They discussed delivery. The owner offered storage, tuning, support. The young man listened, grateful but not overwhelmed. Before leaving, he stood once more in the center of the showroom. He looked around at the instruments, the people, the quiet respect that filled the space. "Thank you for listening," he said to the room. No one laughed. Outside, the air felt different, lighter. He walked slowly, letting the city noise return. The world hadn't changed. He had. That evening, he returned to his small place. The same chair, the same walls. But inside him, something had shifted. He sat quietly, replaying the day in his mind. Not the applause, not the promise, the music. He knew challenges would come, expectations too. But he also knew something else. He didn't need to prove himself anymore. The piano would arrive soon. A new chapter would begin. But he would approach it the same way he always had. With patience, with respect, with honesty. And that, more than anything, was why the story would not end there. The days that followed moved quietly, but nothing felt ordinary anymore. The young man returned to his routine, waking early, working long hours, keeping his life simple. Yet beneath that calm surface, something steady had changed. Not his skill, not his discipline, his belief. When the piano finally arrived, it came carefully wrapped and handled with respect. The delivery team placed it in the small room he had prepared. There was barely enough space, but he had measured everything twice. When they left, the room fell silent again. He stood there for a long moment, alone with the instrument. The same one that had drawn laughter, then silence, then respect. Now it rested in his care. He lifted the lid slowly. The first note he played at home was softer than anything he had played in the showroom. Not because he doubted himself, but because this space was personal. This was where music had always lived for him. He played for no one. Word about what happened spread beyond that single day. People shared the story not because of the money, but because of the moment. A stranger, promise, a choice. Some saw it as luck. Others saw it as fate. Those who truly listened understood it was neither. It was years of quiet work finally meeting an open door. The owner of the showroom noticed changes too. People came in asking different questions. They spoke less about price and more about sound. Some asked about the young man, wondering if they would see him again. He reminded us why we're here, the owner told them. That matters more than sales. The owner kept his word fully. Not for attention, not for praise, but because it was the right thing to do. The young man received invitations, small gatherings, private performances. He declined many, accepted a few. He chose carefully, protecting the quiet focus that had shaped him. When he did play for others again, it was never loud or dramatic. He didn't announce himself. He let the music speak first. People listened. Some asked him why he never talked about his past. He answered simply, because it already taught me what I needed to know. He didn't chase recognition. He didn't rush success. He practiced the same way he always had. Slowly, honestly. One evening, long after the showroom had closed, the owner visited a small local event where the young man was playing. He stood in the back, unnoticed, listening. The music was different this time. Not better, deeper. The owner realized something then. The challenge had not created a pianist. It had revealed one. After the performance, they spoke briefly. "I'm glad you didn't walk away that day," the owner said. "So am I," the young man replied. They shared a quiet smile. Life continued. Bills still needed paying. Days still passed quickly. But the young man carried himself differently now. Not with pride, but with peace. He knew who he was. Sometimes, when he practiced late at night, he thought about the people who had laughed. Not with anger, with understanding. Most people see only what is placed in front of them. Very few look deeper. He hoped the story would remind them to pause next time. The piano remained a symbol, but not of money, of trust, of discipline, of a promise kept. Years later, people would still tell the story, changing small details, adding their own meaning. But the truth stayed simple. A man was judged too quickly. A challenge was made lightly. Music answered honestly. And character decided the ending. The young man never called himself a master. He never needed the title. Those who heard him play already knew. When asked what mattered most, he once said, "Play with respect. Keep your word. And don't underestimate quiet people." That lesson stayed with everyone who crossed his path. In the end, it was never about a piano. It was about listening. And that was the sound that lasted longest of all.